It's a very big day, folks. We finally have brand new PS2 games coming back to PS4 and now also PlayStation 5, properly title ID'd. So if you do go to check out these games, you'll have the option to download either the PS4 or PS5 version, which does also mean that you'll have separate trophy lists if you want to hunt both of them. But our first three games of Sony finally revisiting PS2 games and emulating these titles and also releasing them as a part of the PlayStation Plus Premium Classics program: Sly Cooper and the Thievius Raccoonus, Star Wars The Clone Wars, and Tomb Raider Legend. And I want to initially kick this off with just a reminder to people that I know we always talk about how this is a part of PS Plus Premium, the Classics program. Since the PS Plus relaunch, we saw the PS1, PSP titles, now finally PS2. But it's something where, again, the vast majority of these titles, you don't actually have to subscribe to Premium. Sly Cooper is $9.99, which I am delighted by the way. I thought, like, bare minimum, these things were probably going to be $14.99, USD, mind you. But they're actually exploring the price spectrum here, because Sly Cooper is $10, but Star Wars is as low as $4.99, which that is baffling to me. I'm actually quite pleased to see that, because honestly, that's lower than all the PS2 games that were available on the PS3's PlayStation Store back in the day. Those were almost always typically $10 to $15. But then we've got Lara Croft Tomb Raider priced at $19.99. So this is almost surely a publisher thing, because if you're asking me, I mean, I know a lot of people are maybe pretty pumped about seeing this one come back, and also having trophies as well. But I mean, I would have maybe put that at $10 at the top end, especially considering some of these games aren't necessarily in the best shape, which we'll talk about in a second. But yeah, these games are always available to buy separately. There's really only a handful of titles where they were paywalled, that being a few initial Capcom games, which that is also already gone now, so you can buy them separately, like Mr. Driller or Resident Evil Director's Cut. But let's jump into Sly Cooper. So right off the top, one thing we can say is that there's been some discussion surrounding the resolution of these games, because they seemingly don't seem to be improved all that much. That's at least what I'm hearing, that they're still 480p basically, and there's no enhancements off of what they looked like on PlayStation 2. But I'll be curious to see for myself what it does end up looking like. Alright, spending more time with it, seeing the game, and I've played Sly Cooper so many times across like real PS2 hardware and then also the PS3 remaster. This to me immediately actually seems much closer to the PS3 remaster than like just 480 standard def PlayStation 2. It was my first trophy. I don't know, yeah, it looks noticeably sharper. I'd have to start, I whip out my PS3 copy, maybe do some more direct breakdowns, which I'm sure we'll show some on here, but it looks like it's some sort of multiplier on the resolution, and they're applying anti-aliasing. It does look, I'm not going to say it's like a mind-blowing, but I mean, this is very serviceable. Sort of what I was expecting as far as PlayStation 2 goes. The cutscenes have so far looked very stretched out and blocky, and that seems more reminiscent of what you'd see on PlayStation 2. But so far it looks fine. Alright, so outside of the resolution and frame rate, which we can say real quick for frame rate, I mean, all these games are always hitting frame rate caps. They're not doubling it or really improving it much at all. outside of hitting the caps, which I know a lot of these games, that's the thing, across PS1, PSP, and now even PS2, more so for PS2, I would argue, a lot of these games back in the day on OG hardware did certainly have some slowdown moments, and at least a lot of the games that I've played through this emulator, and I'll be curious to see if it's the same thing for Sly Cooper, but at the very least, they do hold their caps, but yeah, we're not seeing frame rate improvements. But the good thing about having these PS2 games finally returning to the PlayStation Store through implicit conversions, Syrup emulation engine, is they get the same treatment that the PS1 and PSP games got. So we do have the rewinds here. I can just run that back because I messed up that platforming segment. Some of these games can be pretty brutal sometimes with their checkpoints or whatever, so it's just a great way to sort of spare your time and get through these games a little bit more efficiently. But there's the rewinds, right? And then we can also do the save states as well. We've got plenty of those save slots that we can mess around with, make one there. And we've always got that ready to go. But settings as well, so we've got the visual presets here, that being modern, which is like a slightly different color palette. It's like they just changed the exposure. Really doesn't look all that different, but you've got that, right? And then we can go to the classic arcade or modern arcade, so if you want more of a CRT feel, then you've certainly got it. I think these are a little bit too on the nose for my liking, but I mean, if you're into it, it's still here. It's a good option. And then the other really cool thing that I like a lot is having the custom button assignments baked right into the emulator, especially because these are separate from the on-console custom button assignments, right? Because you can do that on PlayStation 5 right in the console settings. On a system level, you can completely customize the controller button layout, but the problem is you have to navigate the console like that as well, and all other software that you play with that button assignment set. Unless you've got a DualSense Edge, then I believe you can map that to the separate profiles. But in the case of having this right in the emulator, the really great thing about this, and you can't do this in the console button custom assignments, is you can actually change the directions of the analog sticks, both the left and right stick. Now that's going to be really handy for the myriad amount of software on PS1, PSP, and PS2, where if the game itself does not offer any different controller layouts, or if they also have those pesky inverted controls, then you can do it right here and set it within the emulator, which I think is really handy. And you can do separate controller presets, and also there's some presets here as well, so we can invert the sticks the way that we want. Or you can also swap the X and the circle button. Interesting that they call it cross. We're playing a game that Bentley audibly says it's the X button, but you got that going on. You can apply that to all controllers. You've got the NTSC and PAL switching here as well, which that's great to have if you do want to play the PAL version. It is there. And we saw this was an issue when they rolled out the Classics program initially back in mid-2022 with the PS1 games. So there's been some slow improvements over time, which we'll talk about near the end of this. But the enhancement section is one thing that people are talking about here. So when you turn this off, basically what this does is it turns off everything else. So now you see the menu has no option for the video presets or the rewinds, the rewind feature, I should say. You really don't have to turn that off or on PlayStation 5 because it's probably something more to do with PlayStation 4. I'll be testing that right after this. But yeah, PS5, you can just leave this on. So that's really the great thing so far. I mean, yeah, if you're maybe a little bit bummed by the visual improvements or lack thereof visual improvements, really, I still think there's a pretty noticeable quality of life improvement having those rewinds and save states. Especially, I think the button layouts, too, is going to come in very handy for the kind of software that we eventually see end up getting re-released. Interesting. All right, Tomb Raider looks noticeably blurry. I don't think I have the HD collection for this, though, and I certainly don't have the original PS2 game, so probably not going to be able to do comparisons on this, but and also I have no frame of reference because I'm not a major Tomb Raider person, so I can't judge this in the same way that I could with Sly. But this looks not as sharp, I would say. And what's interesting about Tomb Raider is that I guess the store listing had screenshots from the PS3 HD collection. which is obviously wrong, and now they're gone. They're not on the store anymore. So there's no more screenshots for this game, and I believe the store listing also mentioned, or rather it does not mention, any actual up-rendering for this particular game. Let me double-check that real quick. Enhanced with up-rendering, rewind, quick save, and custom video filters. This one will also say up-rendering, rewind, quick save, and custom video filters. And then Tomb Raider Legend. It's very bizarre how this game is... It would appear as though it's getting some kind of different treatment. Maybe that's why it looks a little bit blurrier. It does have the rewind. It does have save states. But maybe on the visual side, this game's not seeing a massive improvement. You do have to figure PS2 games are going to be a little bit pickier, especially since Implicit has to also support PlayStation 4 as well. Honestly, that was the thing that I have heard about, is that the issue with how long it took to get PS2 games finally back on PS4, PS5 is that simply PS4 is a bit of a bottleneck. See, this doesn't look bad. It's weird. Its menus and load screens just look noticeably ugly on a lot of these games. But anyway, I'm so curious as to if PS4 is, or rather, PS2 games on PS4, if there is a little bit of a bottleneck there. I mean, the thing is, too, I mean, you can unlock the emulator on PlayStation 4 with a jailbroken console and throw PS2 ISOs at it and just see what happens. And obviously a lot of games are like straight up broken, or they just don't work all that well. And that's part of why, you know, when you sort of monetize emulation on console, it becomes a bean counting thing. You know, you have to really go through the entire QA process for those games again, properly recertify them, and just make sure that they're in a nice playable state. You don't just open up the emulator and let people throw ISOs at it willy-nilly. So you got to figure that there are certain games that are just not worth the hassle. And some games are borderline, and they take a little bit of extra work to get them done. And that's on top of all the licensing hiccups that you're going to run into nowadays as well. Yeah, this doesn't look bad now. Now that we're in gameplay, it looks okay. Yeah, this looks alright. It's not mind-blowing by any stretch. But, I don't know, this wouldn't bother me. But that's my tolerance. I mean, like, the big elephant in the room here is, like... In the real emulation landscape, you can make these games look really damn good on your own hardware. But like we just went over, when it comes to official monetized emulation on console, they just go through a different process. Oftentimes, it's not nearly as good as what you're going to find in the hobbyist sector. But so far, this is okay to me. I mean, the other like bonus here that we can mention, which is very welcomed, is that we're now seeing third-party games get trophies, because you just saw me pop one here on Tomb Raider. So these have trophies, and also we just saw a number of games that previously Implicit Conversions did for PS1 and PSP. Those are getting trophies as well, the PSP ones, because so far we saw the service launched, all these classic games came back, that was really good. But really only a handful of first-party titles had the trophy support. Now third-party games are getting it as well, which I'm curious as to what the holdup was there. I don't know if it's just simply a sheer manpower thing with how many people are at the company and can work on these things, if they need approval from the publishers. I mean, that's all pure speculation, but it's been very gradual improvements. It's slow, it's been rocky, there's no doubt about it. My frustration has always been we're just getting drip-fed hardly any games with, good emulation, but not mind-blowing. Trophies are hit or miss. But, we're getting there, I suppose. Alright, we've moved over to a base PlayStation 4 console, and we'll see how this game performs on that. Because I think, again, the primary reason why we have the on-off for enhanced features is probably to help PS4 performance. I don't know if it's just me, but the color palette looks closer to PlayStation 2 right now. But that might just because I've swapped between so many versions of the game so far. That, and it feels fine. Feels about the same. But, so this is pretty interesting. Look, that's the default. pause menu. As in, if you're playing on PlayStation 4, I assume this is the same on the Pro. I'm, again, on a base console, but it automatically kept enhancements off. PlayStation 5, it stays on. So if I set it to on, that's what I'm curious about. If it will, you know, start to feel a little different here. Which I'm inclined to say it might happen. There's got to be a reason for that, because oh my god, it is feeling a little choppy. It is. It really, really is. No way. All right. Yeah, that's what it's what we're hearing, is that PS4 might have been the problem and what was holding up PlayStation 2 games. It's just sort of initial findings here. I would imagine that's the case for a number of games that they're looking to bring back. Yeah, there's a noticeable little bit of a frame rate drop. Oh, look at that. Yeah, it's definitely a little jittery now. Just because it's I would imagine it's primarily tied to the rewinds. Oh yeah, look at that. It's certainly not as smooth. Oh, that explains it. Alright, well, I think that about wraps it up for our first look at the new PS2 emulator on PS4, PS5, and yeah, I guess the few key takeaways would probably be you do see a noticeable drop in performance when playing on a base PS4. Not sure about PS4 Pro, but if you do want enhancements, that being the save states and rewinds, which I think are some of the more enticing features for playing some of these games again, yeah, that's not really the way to do it, I think. And it would appear as though that was probably the holdup. I would assume Sony probably wants parity across PS4, PS5, and implicit conversions is maybe just beholden to that, and that was the holdup for new PS2 games finally coming back, because it did take quite a while there, obviously, but that's more speculation on my part. The games do appear noticeably sharper versus original PS2 hardware. They're not going to stack up, obviously, to the enthusiast space where, you know, you can really go nutty with your own personal PC and make these games look a lot cleaner than what you typically see through programs like these. But I think the way I consider it, it's serviceable. You can go through the game again. It's now available to a modern audience. That's great. Just like the other great thing about this is implicit conversions now appears to have this sort of runway to do more trophy support for not just the first party games but also third party as well, so that does bode well for the future games in the pipeline. And yeah, overall, I mean, I'm happy that we're finally here. My frustration has always been just the sheer frequency of how many games we get, which is just so slow. We're drip feeding, but I understand the issue simply as the amount of resources available, the QA process, also the license issue as well. So we do have to keep expectations in check for the kind of games we'll eventually see released with this new emulator. My hope is that we also see some of the existing games revisited and put through this new emulator, and therefore they get fixed on PlayStation 5, since we still have some that are problematic on that console via backwards compatibility. But there's a lot of good to be had here. I think this is a solid starting point. Not saying it's fantastic or mind-blowing, but I think it's serviceable so far. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in my next video. You take it easy.